What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we're looking at the top 8 decks from the Champions League Extra format, which was held on December 21st, 2019. So this is the expanded format in Japan. It's called Extra there. They have some cards that are different from our expanded format, but this is definitely a great indicator of some decks and combos that could be strong in our expanded format for Dallas Regionals. It's coming up in a little while, just under 2 weeks away from today. And their top 8 was super interesting, so I think everyone would really like to see what did well there. Before we get into that, just a quick shout out to PotownStore.com. You can use code Celio for 5% off there. They have the new Meowth VMAX codes in, and of course they're in stock with Cosmic Eclipse and pretty much every code you could need. And also shout out to FlipsideGaming.com. You can use code Celio all caps for 10% off there on your next order, $10 or more. So the Champions League Extra 2020 AICHI results, the top 8 decks that you've all been waiting for. There were 4 Trevenant Milotic decks in the top 8. There was 2 Sableye stalls, which we've already covered the first place Sableye stall on this channel. A Zoroark Raticate, which is a deck we haven't really seen much from in North America or really heard anything about in general. And then Reshiram Hou Hou. Just looking at this top 8, it's so different from the expected meta that everybody's talking about here, the meta that we're seeing on ladder and stuff like that, and in League Cups. Aside from the Sableye stall, because Sableye stall was popularized, it's been around on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and everything, so people already knew about that one. But the other decks aren't really too popular here as of now. But I think people might be planning on bringing them either when they heard they were good in Japan, or after they see this video and other videos talking about them, or maybe they were even testing them on their own, like they came up with them on their own. So we're going to look at the lists for the top 8 decks today, and hopefully I'll get to show off, like spotlight some of these decks between now and Dallas. I definitely want to try to work with Reshiram Hou Hou a bit, because I do think that has some potential. So the Sableye stall first place, if you haven't watched my video on that, I go a lot more into detail in my video that came out on Christmas on the Sableye stall that won the Champions League Extra AICHI 2020. And I also made some North American legal lists. So you'll realize there's 2 copies of a card called Player Ceremony next to the Tropical Beach down here at the bottom, and that card is not, it's never been released outside of Japan, so we can't use that. And then this deck also has 4 Puzzle of Time, which we cannot use in North American expanded format. But other than that, the deck can translate over to our expanded format just fine. The goal here is this deck uses the dolls to stall your opponent and make them waste resources and just naturally go through their deck drawing cards. And then the Life Dew with really any of these Pokemon, Life Dew and then Puzzle of Time for the Life Dew back can work. And in a North American list, you'd be using something like Life Dew and then Lana's Fishing Rod to get the Life Dew back, which is not as powerful, but it can still work. And then the Mimikyu is really cool because it can use a second supporter for turn, and Lieutenant Surge has been banned. So Mimikyu is one of the best ways, one of the only ways to use an extra supporter, but I definitely think it's a very powerful way to do so. So I do think there will be a bit of this deck in Dallas. I don't think it's going to reach anything like a 10% of the day 1 meta share, because stall decks are notoriously less played and a little harder to play than attacking decks just because they're non-traditional. So this was the deck that won the Champions League. Like I said, I covered this more in depth in a separate video. Second place is the first of 4 Trevenant Milotic decks. So Trevenant is a promo GX that came out in like a box here, but it came out in multiple arts in Japan, actually. So its first attack swings for 150, and you shuffle 2 random cards from your opponent's hand into their deck. And then So you might be asking, well, how is this any good? Maybe you saw it in Malamar already, but Reset Stamp is banned in Expanded. So the Milotic here, when you knock it out, you can attach up to 3 basic energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon non-EX. Of course, Milotic came out a long time ago, so it didn't exclude GXs, so Trevenant is good to go. So you have that, and then you force your opponent to take prizes with the Milotic, so you can use Ace Trainer. And there's also a Floette in this list. So when you evolve the Floette, you get a random card from your opponent's hand and shuffle it in. So you can essentially Ace Trainer, get one of the cards out of their hand with Floette, and then 2 of the cards out of their hand with Trevenant, putting them to a 0-card hand. This list cannot control the top deck with something like a Trick Shovel or Hiker. I do think that's kind of bad. I would like to see something like that. But just to talk about the cards in here that we can't use in North American Standard real quick, we cannot use Quick Ball because that's coming out in Sword and Shield, but we could use Nest Ball. And then we cannot use Hex Maniac, as that has been banned in North American Expanded format. So turn 1 with this deck, since you cannot, there's no way to get Milotic evolved turn 1, you go in with Horror House GX from the Gengar Mimikyu, which restricts your opponent from playing any cards from their hand. And then it gives you a turn to set up to do the pop a Milotic, attach energy to Trevenant, evolve Floette, swing with Trevenant, and put them to a 0-card hand. So this deck seems like it's popular in Japan. We don't have like their meta shares from prior to cutting to top 8, but the deck had 4 different lists make top 8, so it was definitely successful, and I'm going to assume that it was somewhat popular as well. 3rd place was Zoroark Raticate. This deck has been toyed around a bit with a bit in North American Expanded for Richmond and Portland. So the Raticate for a triple colorless energy, it puts your opponent's active Pokemon down to 10 HP. You put damage counters on the defending Pokemon until their HP is down to 10. And then you use Laser to tick that last damage counter. So you might notice that the resources in this deck are kind of slim. So there's only 2 lasers, even though that's really important. There's only 3 Zoroarks. There's only 2 triple colorless energies, but remember they have Puzzle of Time over there, and we do not have it in our expanded format, so that's definitely something to remember. I am not a fan of Zoroark Raticate. I don't think it's that great because for instance, Guardian has Wonder Energy, and then Mewtwo can run Cobalion or Virizion, so it's not affected by special conditions. It can run Magierna EX, so the Mewtwo is not affected by effects of attacks. And then it can even Stealthy Hood, so if you put a Alolan Muck in this deck, Alolan Muck wouldn't stop the Cobalion or the Virizion. You could Stealthy Hood that Pokemon. So I'm not a big fan of this deck, but in a tag team heavy meta where there are not direct counters to the Raticate, I could see how it could be strong. Just because you're essentially one-shotting the Pokemon with Raticate plus Lasers. So if like the entire meta is tag team Pokemon like Mewtwo without counters, and Reshirams, and the Bird Trio, and Zoroark Ninja, then I could see how this could be very good, and I imagine that it hit a lot of those kind of decks to make it into the top 4. Next, we've got a very interesting deck that, like I said at the beginning, I actually want to get into trying this deck myself a bit. I have not worked with Reshiram as of yet, as of the time I'm recording this video. I have worked with some ADP stuff, and ADP has been underwhelming for me and Expanded. But I think you could really utilize the first attack here instead of focusing on Altered Creation GX, since Reshiram and the Birds actually both have really, really good GX attacks. I guess all 3 of these tag team Pokemon have great GX attacks. So Reshiram, of course, the first attack does 90 for each fire or lightning energy you discard from your basic Pokemon, up to 3, from your benched Pokemon, up to 3 discarded, so it can do up to 270 before damage modifiers. This deck plays a choice band, so it could do 300. And then the GX attack does 170 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, and if you have 2 extra energy, then it does 170 to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So you could pop like 2 Dedennes, a Dedenne, a Lele. And then, of course, the Bird Trio, if you have an extra Fire, Water, Lightning in addition to the colorless, it does 110 to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. And then you shuffle the Bird Trio Tag Team back into your deck. So I think this deck is pretty versatile, that it has 3 different GX attacks that are reasonable to use. It has 2 means of energy acceleration. I guess technically 3. It has the Max Elixirs, it has the Tapu Koko Prism, and then it has ADP's first attack Ultimate Ray. And this deck doesn't have too many things that are important that we can't play in the North American expanded format. So it has Quick Ball, but we can just play Nest Ball, and then it has Hex Maniac. So Hex Maniac is very good for getting around bench barriers like Mr. Mime and Mew. I guess you could consider an Alolan Muck line in here to turn off Mew or Mr. Mime bench barriers, because bench damage can be a huge deal. Or you can just maybe gust up the Mew or the Mr. Mime and then do your bench damage next turn. But this is another deck that, like I said about Zoroark Raticate, this deck is not seeing a lot of hype at the moment, but it seems really good. Now, it does, I would say it should be susceptible to single prize or 2 prize focused decks that can trade with it favorably, since it's playing 5 tag teams and those are the focus of your deck. Your only non-tag team attacker is the Clefairy with Metronome that can copy one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. So I do think this has potential. Obviously, it did well in Japan. Not everything always translates over well from Japan to North America. But I think this deck seems good, and I want to try it for myself. So I definitely encourage you all to try out some Reshiram variants. And I'm thinking about maybe throwing in a Pyroar line in here, like Drew Kennett's Bird Trio deck had the Pyroar line. I think that could be kind of cool. And like I said, also considering maybe the Alolan Muck line to turn off the bench barriers. So here we have another Trevnor deck. This one is playing no Gengar Mimikyu for the turn 1 Horror House, but it's playing a Garbotoxin line. So you can turn off draw power, so like an Oranguru or a Zoroark GX or an Octillery, you can Garbotoxin to turn off those abilities after you pop your Milotic, so when you put your opponent's hand down to a low number, it hurts them a lot more. But other than that, pretty much the same kind of Trevnor Milotic deck that we were talking about just earlier. And then again, we're going down to 6th place, another Trevnor Milotic. This one has the Gengar Mimikyu, does not have the Toxin. Basically, we have a sample of 4 different Trevnor Milotic decks from the top 8 in Japan. So if you wanted to work with this archetype, you have a lot of different takes and ideas to combine, and different ideas to try out in replacement of the non-North American legal cards. And then I'm just going to kind of skip through these last couple since they're just decks that we already talked about here. Then this is the last one, just another Trevnor Milotic deck. This one has 2 Dawn Wings. It has the Gengar Mimikyu as well. And again, nothing too crazy here that's different from the other ones. And then lastly, 8th place was another Sableye stall. This one was playing the Jirachi Stardust. I talked about that in a Zoroark video earlier a couple weeks ago while covering expanded format stuff. But same concept here. You're milling your opponent. You're stalling them out with the dolls. You're stalling them out with Life Dew. You're doing cheeky things like playing double supporters a turn with Mimikyu. And yeah, like I said, nothing different here really from the other Sable Stall deck that makes it like a completely different deck. So Very different top 8 here than we're looking at in North America. Like, if you ask players, like I have been asking players in my recent videos, what they think the most popular decks will be for Dallas Regionals and what decks are testing against, you hear Turbo Dark, Zoroark, Guardian, Eggrow. None of that is even remotely shown here in the top 8 of the Champions League Extra from December in Aichi. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Shoutouts again to PotownStore.com and FlipsideGaming.com. Very happy to be working with them. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content. I'm going to try to be getting as much expanded content as I can out between now and Dallas. And I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.